This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guests only. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. And because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Welcome to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces. Linda Major, Jack Major, and Ellen Bennett are three fierce advocates, two moms and a dad who are passionate about changing the way eating disorders and mental illness are viewed in our society. Linda, Jack, and Ellen believe we need to stop the stigma, band together, and help people find resources and support early on. They advocate to foster awareness, enhance education, and improve treatment, as well as to help society understand and embrace individuals and families who are affected by eating disorders and all mental health conditions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, episode 112, The Eating Disorder Trap, with author Robyn Goldberg, registered dietitian nutritionist, CEDRD-S, and she will be with us shortly. I'm sitting here in the studio with my right-hand man and soulmate, Jack, and our dear friend and fellow advocate, Ellen Bennett. Jack and Ellen, it's really always so much fun to do these podcasts alongside you, and I must say thank you to our listeners for tuning in and for all the positive feedback we have received. It keeps us moving forward. Our guests have all been wonderful, and we look forward to getting to know them, or sometimes getting to know them better. Each of us benefit from the knowledge and the wisdom that they share with us, and today is no exception. I'm excited about today's show. Is there anything you guys would like to say before we get started?
Just welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be back.
We're so glad to be back. It's like, woohoo, we're here.
All the links for today's show will be in the show notes. So I'd like to begin with a quote that our special guest, Robyn Goldberg, used at the beginning of her book, The Eating Disorder Trap, which is a wonderful book. One cannot think well, love well, sleep well, if one has not dined well. And that is a quote from Virginia Woolf. I think it's a great quote, and it's true. So take a breath and let that resonate as we read Robyn's bio. Robyn began her career at Cedars-Sinai Medical Hospital in Los Angeles as the inpatient dietitian in the Department of Cardiology. Over the last 25 years, she has developed her own private practice in Los Angeles, California, where she specializes in medical conditions, disordered eating, eating disorders, health at every size, pre-pregnancy nutrition, and people in recovery.
Robyn is a certified eating disorder registered dietitian and supervisor from IAEDP, which stands for the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals. For the last 8 years, Robyn was the nutrition counselor for the Susan Krevoy Eating Disorders Program at the Wright Institute Los Angeles, and led eating disorder and body image groups at various sober livings in Los Angeles.
She is contributing author and is a nationally and internationally known registered dietitian nutritionist. She has been quoted in the New York Times, the Huffington Post, Vogue, The Fix, Shape Magazine, Fitness, Oxygen, Pilates Style, Diabetes Forecast, BH Weekly, and Life and Style. She has been on national television as an eating disorder expert on The Insider. Robyn is the author of the new book, The Eating Disorder Trap,
which is a guide for clinicians, loved ones, and she is also the host of the podcast, The Eating Disorder Trap.
It's quite a bio. That's quite an impressive bio.
It sure is. It's diverse and impressive. You've written a beautiful and informative book to help individuals with eating disorders as well as their loved ones. It's also helping clinicians treat their patients because eating disorders are so complex. What made you decide to specialize in eating disorders, Robyn?
Thank you, everyone, for having me. What made me decide to specialize in eating disorders, I always say it happened by accident. I was a college tennis player, and my 3 roommates all had bulimia nervosa, and I would fall asleep to them purging at night. Oh. So I was not informed or aware of eating disorders because I was that kid who had a one-track mind, and that was to get a tennis scholarship. So as several of them started to confide in me, because I had a different schedule than everyone, going to sleep early at night, waking up early because having matches and such. One of them at breakfast started sharing with me, quote unquote, her secret, and wanted me to know that she would keep the glass of milk down, that she believed it coated her stomach and nothing else. And I just remember feeling like I would say a rabbi or a priest, like people would confide in me because I was really into my zone of tennis. And after I transferred from Sonoma State, I graduated from Cal State Northridge. And in my internship in Virginia, and as years went on, I remember when I was working at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, and the chief clinical had asked all the dietitians who would be interested in seeing this reoccurring patient who was admitted for her eating disorder. And I always say I learned about eating disorders backwards. And what I mean by that is this was someone who was on a tube feeding and tied down with restraints. And to me, I always say the hospital's not the place to learn how to counsel someone and improve their relationship with food. It's really to help them become like medically stable. So at that point, I realized I needed to learn how to counsel people, because any entry-level dietitian is green. They're not trained in eating disorders. And say I was at that time in my career, I was a whiz at what's called enteral and parenteral nutrition, tube feedings and TPNs, which I couldn't even remember now if you were to ask me. And at that point, I thought, okay, I really need to be able to get some guidance because this is something I'm interested in for when I start my private practice. And my first experience and exposure was Francie White, who is an eating disorder dietitian in Santa Barbara. She runs these wonderful workshops with Anita Johnston and Carolyn Costin. They're called Tending the Feminine Souls. And it's limited to 15 women, therapists and dietitians, where they basically work on all your issues, have you be broken down. And I went to a weekend retreat. It's called the White Lotus in Santa Barbara. And I was like, wow, this was eye-opening. I was very inexperienced. And this was what led me to say, okay, because I was interested and I knew I could make a difference and help someone. So this was probably like 27 years ago that I went to my first eating disorder intensive.
So I just have a question going back to your roommates. Were they tennis players too, or?
No.
No. Okay.
I was the only freshman recruit playing college tennis. So yeah, they were not, collegiate athletes.
Okay.
Well, and your reaction was a compassionate one. It could have been very different too. I mean, it led you into specializing into the field that you knew you needed help with. That says a lot about you.
Thank you. Well, what I realized too, Linda, and I kind of go back in time to different aspects of my life. I've always been a driven person, and I think people see I'm to myself. I'm, if you tell me not to say anything, it's in the vault. And I think looking back, it was sort of like, oh yeah, I can talk to Robyn because she's not going to judge me. And it was just like, okay, that's interesting. It's information, but I never thought, oh wow, this is what I'd like to do career-wise, because when I was at Sonoma State, I was a different major. I was an exercise physiology major, and then I transferred because I couldn't handle the cadavers. So
I can understand that.
Yeah. So in your book, which I read, which was fabulous, you said that you hope that it would help people dealing with eating disorders understand the medical, nutritional, and psychological concerns professionals should be addressing should their services be needed for somebody that has an eating disorder. And I totally agree with this. And I believe every eating disorder patient should have access to those services from somebody who has eating disorder education. So here's my big thing. How do we get insurance companies on board? And what is your biggest frustration with the system in place now?
To me, my wish list, Jack, my fantasy is that, and maybe it exists, but if it does, they're not doing a very good job with it, is that every insurance company has a team of eating disorder trained providers, a doctor, a psychologist, a dietitian. So whether it's Blue Shield or Aetna or Screen Actors Guild or whatever insurance is, that the problem is any person that's reviewing a case, in my opinion, with the insurance companies is not an eating disorder expert. Right. So I hear this time and time again, like, oh, this person's being terminated because their weight restored. It's like, that's part of what's happening, but also psychologically, their eating disorder voice is very loud. They still have food rules. They're restricting. So I really think insurance carriers need to do a better job of having employees that are, in my world, that work for them. That is my wish list. I mean, I don't think that exists, but to me, that would help the situation. But I do feel like it's a business. It's a money thing, which is why it probably hasn't happened.
Wow. When Emily first was diagnosed and she started to need help, I just assumed that the doctors were trained and would be able to help her with her eating disorder. And being that I was so naive that didn't realize how little training they got. And I mean, that's going back to 2009, 2008. So here we are in 2020.
22.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
he lost a couple years.
Yeah, COVID. I'm going back. Yeah. So 2022, and I think we've made some baby steps in training the medical community, but it's just not near enough. And for some insurance company to sit there wherever they are, 1,000 miles away, to determine whether somebody is ready to get out of treatment, it is crazy when they don't know that person and they aren't trained to evaluate that person. So.
The other thing, sorry, I want to interject too, because this literally happened to me before speaking to you, when you're speaking about providers, Jack, and how there is some movement. I think, okay, some movement. I look at over 2 decades of doing this. I just had a call with a psychologist who is not an eating disorder trained provider, referred me someone for her eating disorder. And as I was explaining to this person, we were talking about, books I would recommend that she read. The psychologist had suggested one that I had not read, that was not written by an eating disorder provider. Basically, like, this psychologist is CBT based, cognitive behavioral therapy, but the person is not, an expert. And I said to her, I said, well, the problem is when you're saying you can't eat after dinner, and if you're hungry, have more at dinner. I said, that's not allowing a person to learn how to develop a relationship with their body. And she's, well, but Robyn, it's only for X amount of weeks. I'm like, it's still a rule. And I think, and she's read my book, but still, I think the problem is when you're trained in a specific modality, and I see this time and time again, that providers oftentimes think they're at liberty to then be the captain of the ship for someone, this person used to restrict, now they're binging. It's like, as you all know, one eating disorder can morph into another, or an individual has multiple eating disorders at the same time. So That's like a frustrating part. And as I even said in my book, I really feel like this should be a part of all providers' training.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you add the comorbidities into the people with eating disorder that they don't address. I don't know. I at Ellen's conference yesterday, I sat with a family with a 15-year-old that they're just so frustrated. She's been to so many treatment centers and so many hospitals, and she's waiting to get into residential treatment. And there's many places to get treated, they're throughout the country. But it's just, to me, they've been doing the same treatment for 20 years or more, and it hasn't been working. And it's just the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And there are, they do get positive results. Don't get me wrong.
It works sometimes for some people,
sure.
Right?
But I've talked to so many families of people that have lost children like us, and people that have children in treatment now that are so frustrated with the system and trying to navigate the insurance industry. So my big goal is to get these people like us and other families and clinicians like you to Washington, and because the insurance industry, nobody regulates them. They're self-regulated. So
I lobbied on Capitol Hill before COVID on the Eating Disorder Coalition for National Eating Disorder Awareness Day.
Okay.
So I've done that. So. And it's cool to sit with, the different constituents and your state and people we did, and they all signed on the Affordable Care Act, but it's like the rate of molasses to see change happen. So
I know we've been there too.
Yeah, we've been
Alan's
there too.
been there
Locally and statewide in there. And in the meantime, we're losing so many young people. So,
well, and what people don't understand is residential treatment is one thing, but it's what happens after that. Which you want to sustain that recovery and those relationships, which it was so evident in your book, your relationship with your registered dietitian, nutritionist trained in eating disorders is so important. And I know Emily had a bad experience when she was in the hospital and she never wanted to work with a dietitian again. And it was just somebody who wasn't trained and said some things that were very offensive. And I'm sure it wasn't intended at all, but it was the way it was perceived. So, there's a lot of psychology in what you do and how you talk to your patients. And I have so much respect for your field.
Thank you.
Okay, shifting topics just a little bit. I am passionate about stopping our toxic diet culture. And in your book, you debunk diet culture, fad diets, and explain the importance of every food group in a person's diet. The last fad seems to be intermittent fasting, which is the opposite of intuitive eating. And when you hear fasting, you kind of go, what? What are we doing now? How can we possibly infuse our toxic diet culture now with saying fasting is good? And I know some physicians practice intermittent fasting themselves, and they recommend it to their patients. What are your thoughts about this? We know malnutrition affects all of our organs, but can you speak specifically how it affects the heart and the brain?
Thank you, Ellen. Well, first and foremost, that could be a whole episode of us in itself. All the reasons I would not recommend intermittent fasting.
Come back. We need to do this again and just focus on that and how our diet culture is contaminating all of us on an exponential level. Okay, go ahead.
So the problem is that the brain becomes slow-mo. A person has a difficult time cognitively thinking of a thought. The way we get as we age, some timers, it's like all the time and worse when you're not getting enough nourishment, enough carbohydrates to the brain, calories. And the problem too is the same thing. The heart becomes slower and slower. And the individual doesn't understand, like, running is contraindicated, let alone any kind of movement that elevates their heart rate, because their body's in this fight or flight survival mode of trying to survive. So individuals that will say, yes, I am lightheaded from just from sitting to standing, or when I get out of bed, or I'm watching TV, or I'm seeing stars, or when I'm in the shower, there's little sparkles. And to understand that that's not what an athlete experiences. Between bradycardia, the slowing down of the heart, and really a lack of nutrition, you're straining your heart to work overtime. And this is how and why scary things happen when an individual can fall through the cracks. I have a person who's a college athlete running track with anorexia nervosa, can't skip her season. And it was like, had this injury, had that injury, of course, and more injuries will happen and they won't be able to repair and recover. And I think it kind of goes back to Jack's initial statement of just the lack of training and information, and people want their physician to be the person that can answer all these questions. But it's literally, I feel like I'm a salmon swimming upstream when I'm having conversations with these providers that are not eating disorder based, because they collude with the disease. And even now, just, my clients' parents are like, oh, well, we're going to ask you and the doctor, since the basketball season has ended, what kind of activity can she do? Well, it's still 4 years and she hasn't menstruated. All these factors, like her period's not going to return if we're trying to get this activity. I mean, it's an ongoing problem. And I think sometimes providers will say, they'll say what the family wants to hear. Like, yes, just for your own psychological connection with people because of the pandemic, why not play basketball 3 days a week for 30 minutes? But I think with a lot of the providers I work with now, I see coming from a place of frustration, Ellen, where they'll say, this is what's recommended, but it's up to you what you want to do. And I feel like more times than none, the family will err on like what's going to make their loved one happy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Make things. I love the phrase collude with the eating disorder. That is beautiful because it happens way too often with so many different practitioners. Yeah. Oh, that's terrifying.
Can you speak about the brain too? Because I know in my case, and I've said this so many times with Emily, how, when she was a young teenager and going through high school and college, how rational her thinking was. I mean, she thought out everything and her future and planned things ahead. And then when the eating disorder took over and we brought her to the ED, emergency department and stuff, and a psychiatrist would come down and evaluate her after she was stabilized for a day or two and tell me how brilliant Emily was. And I could see her answering their questions and manipulating them because she wasn't making good decisions about her health. She was constantly becoming decompensated and having to go get stabilized again and again and again. And she, cognitively, she just wasn't able to make good decisions. So, that the lack of nutrition obviously affected her brain and thinking.
Would anybody say?
Well, I think too, a provider could see how clever and bright someone is. And I was just discussing this with a client yesterday who's very smart, the hardest private school in the country. And we were discussing for when I first met her, where she was as opposed to now. And there's definitely this inability to make decisions, being slow, very emotional, different. And this is all due to the brain. So it could be that you said, oh, you know what? We're going out to dinner tonight instead of having dinner at home. Boom, that could set the individual off to cry just because they can't control their emotions when their brain is starved. Mm-hmm. And, a starved body is a starved mind. And it's really transparent in relationships, not wanting to socialize. I mean, even COVID, the eating disorder thrives on isolation and loneliness and stay at home. Oh, great. I have clients like, I've loved this with COVID. I can be on Zoom. You're seeing me from the neck up. You have to see it's really just been an eating disorder's dream, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
I love how you connected the lack of nutrition to the emotional irregularity, that your responses are off, because that's so real. When you're dealing with Ed, that emotional roller coaster can be a terrifying thing for the individual as well as any loved one or someone working with them.
Thank you. It's true.
So, Robyn, a dietitian is such an essential part of somebody's team, such an important part for anyone who has any type of eating disorder. Has the Health at Every Size movement changed how you evaluate and treat your patients? And do you see eating disorders affecting more males in the last decade?
When I started my career, I did not know about HAES. It's probably been about 15 years that I've been a HAES provider. When I started my career, it was when the first edition of intuitive eating first came out. So I always looked at the entire person as a person, but I do think, like all dietitians, I have provided harm. I mean, I'm trying to think of a specific example because I never put people on diets. I look at an article It was written in my local newspaper called the Beverly Hills Weekly. It's framed in my office and it's all yellow. And I'm speaking about intuitive eating. I mean, and this article was written like 22 years ago. So I was always ahead of the 8 ball. When I worked at the hospital, I was considered like the black sheep of dietitians because I did things in the political way that I needed to at the hospital. But when I would chart my notes, I remember my chief clinical, I was called in that office time and time again. I was never a bad kid. I always followed the rules. I'm that person. I pay my bills on time. I don't steal. I don't cheat. And it was like, how come you're putting in your notes? How does that feel in your body? What do you like to eat? Like, this is the protocol. So I was always confronted and chewed out for some of the dietitians at the hospital I stay in touch with always say, I love your alternative approach. I'm thinking, I'm not alternative. They're just living in a cave of being an oncology dietitian or GI dietitians and never embraced intuitive eating and health at every size.
And what about males? Have you seen more males in the last decade being diagnosed with eating disorders? I know with males, it's binge eating disorder that is the most common.
My practice before COVID, Linda, was 60% female and 40% male with a couple, I'd say, non-binary in there. So I always had a lot of men in my practice, all ages. I've always been. The percents have certainly shifted, I would say, over COVID. I'm probably 85 or 90% female. And then everyone else, I have, 3 transgender clients now and men. So it's always been there. I think what's changed is that men are having the courage, or boys, to share their story to someone and seek help. As I hear this from all my male clients, and it's funny because this was even, said in the New York Times article the other day on bigorexia, is that we have the same concerns that women do. It's just not spoken about. And I think, men are taught to be macho, not to show your emotions, and all these factors. But it's I think that's why I've always had so many adult men, teenage boys, kids in my practice. I've been able to connect with them. I think being an athlete, I've always given a lot of athletic analogies. And that's, I think, a way that I can oftentimes connect with a lot of the guys I see, or, talk about other activities. I feel like it's been there. It's just something that the media now writes about more and more. So to me, it's been there. It's just the courage to have that conversation and move forward.
Well, the male role model has changed. I mean, I'm going to be 70. Linda says I'm not 70 yet, and I'm not. I will be in August. But going back into my days of teenager and stuff, and looking at football players and basketball players and all that, they were just regular people. I mean, they had a skill and everything, but they weren't. These guys now that are on TV, they're like superhuman, and they're like video game characters and stuff, and they're all just cut muscular, and there's ads on TV for these protein supplements, and I saw one today for men my age. If you're over 60, you've lost testosterone, and there's these supplements to make you stronger and more energy and more muscular, and it's like it just inundates the culture, and males feel inferior if they don't look like the guys on TV, especially the athletes.
I understand. I'm married to one, Jack, who is your age, who is a professional tennis player, and is like, I saw this commercial on creatine. So yes, I'm living with it.
But you're not letting him buy it, right?
Tell him I'm not involved. I can refer him out.
Okay.
It's always so tough with your own family.
But it's just got to be hard because, I just never, going back to my childhood and stuff, I never thought about my body and didn't compare it with other superheroes. So,
well, you're my superhero, honey.
I am, yes. So you now have a new endeavor educating and helping people navigate our current eating disorder treatment system, which it's got to be invaluable, with an online course that you have. And can you tell us about that course? And it's got to be somewhat overwhelming for sure. I mean, you've got to be inundated with people, and And can you tell us?
Not yet. Working on it.
Okay.
But yes, so created. Yes, happy to take referrals. And actually, I'll just say for any listener from Once Shattered, if you email me, happy to create a 15% coupon code, because we just put our course, your recovery resource, out into the world a couple weeks ago. And basically, there's not enough resources for parents and partners who have loved ones struggling. And this is why my colleague Becca Clegg and I developed this. We really wanted to have 2 eating disorder experts with over 4 decades of experience approaching it from 2 different angles, from the psychological, the nutritional, the self-care piece for parents. It's a multimedia 35 module online course, doesn't have to be done in order, with really understanding basics about eating disorders, understanding how they are able to be supportive. We have worksheets, we have videos, and really, understanding too, like, the insurance piece or something that's low fee, resources we recommend. We really put our minds together over many, many months of what we felt like was lacking in the field. And also that we've worked in treatment. We are providers. We're not someone that's had a lived experience. Is like, there's people that sell like the lived experience of, okay, this is what I've done. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think understanding from providers of everything I would want every parent to know is in this course.
That is everything as a parent walking this path I wanted, I needed. And as you're saying it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so powerful. I'm signing up. I'm doing it. And it's what's needed.
Yeah.
Because we need to understand, we need to be trained. We need this so desperately, and it's not out there because you're not supported. Parents don't get a whole lot of support from treatment. They do the best they can, but their focus is much more on the individual and the parent. And as we all know, the family, loved ones, and parents are critical and essential. They're the it. They're the team. They're the team.
Yeah.
Yes. So I am like blown away by you describing what you're doing, because that's it. It's, oh my God, walk me back 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And I'm like, I wish someone had said, did you know you could do this? So we're going to be screaming from the rooftops. This is available. This is available.
Thank you.
And I had a sneak peek at the program, and it's very comprehensive, and it takes you through everything. And there's so much to learn, and it's just a wonderful resource. And I know it's going to be very well received, and it certainly is. So needed.
So much needed.
So needed.
Oh my God. I have tears. Just, it's like the greatest gift for parents to say that this is out there, it's available. Yeah.
And for loved ones, for adults too, for spouses, because it's overwhelming no matter what the age the person has been diagnosed, for sure.
Okay.
And I will say the book is truly wonderful too, because it takes you through a lot of the science of food and why every food group is so important. And it also shares a lot of vignettes with her patients, which are really very helpful too. And it really just highlights how important the team is. And that's what society needs to learn, is that it takes a village, for sure.
Absolutely.
And it's written in a very basic, simplistic manner, so you don't have to be an expert in the field. And I wanted to write something that everyone can pick up and read, whether it's your optometrist, your gardener, or your neighbor. We all can read the same.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it is very easy to read. It's a quick read, but it's also on Audible too if people are too busy to read. And that was just very, very well done.
Yeah,
Like
I mean, as a pharmacist for 40 years, it just gave me a lot of reminders of what I learned back in pharmacy school about fats and carbohydrates and proteins and how everything's so important and work together. And so it was a great book, and I love the real life stories too. It was great.
We all need to relearn how to eat and enjoy and embrace all foods.
We did pretty good last night.
Oh, absolutely. I have a really quick question for you. We've talked a lot about intuitive eating, and can you kind of just, hey, this is what we're talking about? Because I could be wrong, but I'm thinking not everybody really understands what that is. You hear it and you're like, oh yeah, it's good.
So being an intuitive eater, there are not rules involved. You can't mix this with that. You have to there's nothing that way. I mean, I always like to say, you think of just a baby, a little kid. I mean, you watch baby little kid and they are examples of what intuitive eating is. Being able to play around food. There's not the emotional, this is my last time of having a cupcake. I'm going to have another one because it'll be taken away. So basically being an intuitive eater is where an individual's learning how to trust their body, allowing their body to be their barometer, to be able to make food choices freely without guilt or shame or second guessing. Am I doing it right? Am I okay? I've eaten this today. Maybe I should eat this later. The problem is diet culture has just exploded with having people doubt and lose the trust and confidence that their body has betrayed them. So if you're wanting macaroni and cheese for 3 meals a day, great, have macaroni and cheese. There will be times that the thrill will wear off. You might say, yeah, I kind of would like some chicken. Maybe I'd like some broccoli. But I think the problem is that we have all these conflicting messages regarding when to eat, what to eat, how much, how little. Don't drink liquid with food. It can only be room temperature. I mean, eating is a lot less complicated than what diet culture makes it. I always say to myself, if I wasn't in my field, I would be confused and overwhelmed too. Yeah. So it's where you can find pleasure in eating. Sometimes we eat because we're not hungry. It looks good. That's normal. But if we're finding, I'm eating regularly to soothe or numb my feelings, that becomes a problem. If we do it, from time to time, not a problem. That's normal. But I think understanding that people enjoy food. Food is something to be enjoyed, not fearful of. And when you're an intuitive eater, you can make choices without questioning what you're eating tomorrow, what you ate earlier. It's different if you're like, yeah, you know what? I had this great meal and I'm feeling a little tired. Oh yeah, I kind of feel like I need something a little less dense. But that's coming from a place of learning how to listen to what your body's telling you. Our bodies are pretty resilient. They're not going to betray us. And diet culture has taught us that your body will betray you. Mm-hmm.
Well, we're almost out of time here. I'm so glad that you could join us today. It's been wonderful. Do you want to share your links with us? They're going to be in the show notes for sure. But would you just like to tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yes. So I have several websites. My private practice website is askaboutfood.com. My book website is theeatingdisordertrap.com. My Instagram is Robyn Goldberg, Robyn with a Y, Goldberg RDN. And my Twitter is Robyn with a Y, RDN. And my course, Your Recovery Resource, is on both websites. So if you go into askaboutfood.com or theeatingdisordertrap.com, the direct link to Your Recovery Resource is there as well.
Oh, that's great.
Well, thank you, Robyn, for being with us today. And as you said, we could have you back and do another show on just intuitive eating.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you so much. Come back. We need to continue this discussion. It was awesome. For our listeners, please tell your friends about Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces. Rate, review, share on the podcast platform you are listening to. We need your help in starting the conversations and stopping the stigma. Everyone's mental health matters.
And don't forget to pick up the eating disorder trap. You won't be sorry. Thank you so much, Robyn. This has been wonderful. Thank you. I know how busy you are, and how valuable your time is. So thank you. And I'm sure our listeners will be thanking you too.
So thank you to our listeners, and a big thank you to Scott Fitzgerald and Rockbox Recording and Production. This is the place if you want to record a podcast. This is the place to do it. Your podcast, your audiobook, and your legacy casts for your loved ones. I think that's a great thing, the legacy cast. So thank you all for listening today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. If you want to record a podcast, this is the place to do it. Your podcast, your audiobook, and your legacy casts for your loved ones. I think that's a great thing, the legacy cast. So thank you all for listening today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.